closer to the time we originally set out to start this podcast. Uh, so I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co-host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I've had worse days.
You know what? You know what? At least it's not. I've never had a bad day in my life. We're inching closer to the Anthony crash out. Uh,
Eh,
I expect
One day I'm
murderers
just
or
going to get
something.
on and go, you know what? It's awful. It's awful, okay?
I'm going to air out all my petty grievances out on a stream. All of them, even the petty ones.
And then you're just going to go ahead and turn your mic off. And that's going to be the entire stream. Just me ranting.
Like a good Italian. So the thing that we're talking about today is something that's been of interest to me for quite some time, but not something I've been willing to really talk about too much, and that's what is important in a component of a story of writing. Uh, Anthony had a post about Orc City, John Douglas, and so on and so forth. And let us both say we commend John Douglas and offer him an olive branch crown for how he handled Orc City. This could have, for a less confident writer, this could have been a gamma crash out that would have been still gamma radiating like a nuclear testing site to this day.
Yeah, no. The way he handled Orc City was like unbelievably good.
Oh yeah. So, uh, kudos to him. Uh, but Anthony said something about it, which I disagree with actually. In the most
Bum,
insidious
bum.
terms, lightning flash, thunder roll. He said that prose is one component of writing and one of the least important. Well, Anthony, I disagree. And I'm going to lay out my argument now. Prose is, in fact, one of the most important part of writing because it's the central mechanic of what you're actually reading. While one could say, well, Ben, this Excel spreadsheet document has no prose, I would say you're being autistic. This isn't what I'm talking about, obviously. No. What I'm talking about is how shall I put it? When you're reading something for pleasure or for instruction, the manner of how the writer has put his writing on the book is important. Therefore, let me see here. Let me make sure I'm not making a fool of myself. First, prose. Language follows natural flow or rhythm of speech, grammatical structures. Okay, good. Uh, Prose is actually the foundational blocks of which good writing comes from. Without good prose, you don't have good characters. Without good prose, you don't have good settings for the good dialogue to take place. The setup, the climax, the denouement of the story requires prose to back the heights and depths of what your characters are going through in the events of the tale. I'm not, of course, talking about the plot itself. I'm not talking about the characters themselves, but rather the mechanical nature by which they are communicated to the reader. Yes, there we go. That's my argument.
Okay. So let's look through exactly what was said in response to this. First off, the post I was responding to said this. It was a guy who I have no idea who this is, but his name is David Hines. Like literally, I saw this. I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. I don't know anything about him. I don't know if he is hashtag our guy or not, and I don't care. So,
We'll cancel him later.
yes. He says, reading a bit of the notorious Orc book, and I think the acknowledgments sum up the situation here. Says, thanks to my editor, Morgan Newquist, for helping me become a better writer. I want to thank the dearth of other indie fantasy authors and indie creators I have read and met over the past few years, whose enduring work helped encourage me in my own writing career. So very heartfelt, very nice. Yeah. And this is what David says in response to this. The author is enthusiastic, loves the genre, and 15% in, he has not only managed to avoid the trap of introducing too many characters to remember, but has spaced out their introductions and given them clear things to want. In prose so painfully amateurish, it feels unbeta read. Okay, so the context of this is if you've ever read the Orc City post, I've seen people try and go, and generally it's people who are trying, like, I feel like they feel bad for the guy and the beating he took, which, to be fair, you should, because it was entirely unfair. He made a pretty milquetoast point about, who was it, Kojima? Like,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, he made an incredibly milquetoast criticism of Kojima, not even a particularly harsh one. And, like, people tried to embarrass him, even though he was a small author. But the thing is, what I will argue here is that Orc City is not a good piece of writing. It repeats itself a lot, which is the funniest part, right? It's very overdramatic, very cliche, and generally just feels kind of amateurish, like it needed an editorial pass. With that said, when I've spoken to people who have like, yeah, I've read the Orc book, nobody seems to have really hated it from what I've read, who's being honest, right?
That's fair.
And this is David Hines' review is a good example. He gives a bunch of examples of like of prose issues in the story, right? So, for example, he says from the world building info dump, he refers to measurements as a hand of time, a half a hand, and a finger of time, which are time measurements.
Right.
And then he says, hands and fingers are units of time. A scant few pages in the opening chapter, they are a unit of military strength. And then he has the astonishing clarity of this military report. And then the military report is not very well written, right?
Of course.
That's the whole point of this section. But I want to remind you what he said originally, which is this. The author has managed to avoid 15% in. That's not an insubstantial portion of the book, by the way. 15% is fairly large. He has not only managed to avoid the trap of introducing too many characters to remember, but has spaced out their introductions and given them clear things to want. What I am saying is that if you have a good story and you know roughly what to tell and how to tell it, I'm trying to think of how to put this exactly, because I know exactly what I think, but I don't. But I want to put this in a way that's easy to understand. Like, you have a good story and you understand how stories are structured. So you structure the story well and you have a good story to tell and you tell it. That your prose is amateurish is not good. I mean, it's a thing that you need to fix in your writing, just like anything else. But it's also not going to make all of the other good things in your story go away. It is the mechanism in which the story is delivered, yes, but the structure of the story, the things that are happening in it, the characters, the themes, the way that the story is set up and told, all of these, I think, will matter to at least a certain type of reader more. The ones who want to go like, I want to read the most beautiful prose in the world. Like, there are people who are amazing at writing prose, really good at it. A good example, and this is going to come up to something that we'll talk about later. I am reading, kind of on and off, sort of. I might not even finish it. We'll see. A book called Lancelot by a guy named Giles Christensen. It is a very well-written book. Prose-wise, it is really probably better than average. I would say that this is one of the things that, like, the average trad pub author will have over the average indie author, if only because the indie is so much more expansive. You just won't have people as experienced as writing prose generally, with exceptions, obviously, like John C. Wright, for example, is one of the great prose writers of our time. Yeah, like that's clearly an exception in the indie world. But even John, though, he cut his teeth and came up in the trad pub world. So, that's one of the things that trad pub uses to weed people out, right? Because it's a thing that you really, really, really need to work to learn, like how to write beautiful prose. And indie authors, I'll often be one of the last things they learn because, frankly, it's one of the things you least care about. If you ask me, like, why do you like that genre? And this is another really good example here. David Hines says this. He clearly loves the genre. I'm not going to go, oh, I love it because of that prose. I'm going to go, I love these types of stories and these types of characters and these types of things. I really, really want to tell this sort of story myself. So that's the stuff you're passionate about. That's the stuff you get good at, and you know exactly what to represent. The prose is going to be last on your list. Whereas you get something like Giles Christian's Lancelot, the prose is excellent, very, very well written, sometimes even poetic, but there's something off about the story. Like the things that are happening, the way the characters, the way it's told is weird and wrong. That it is technically better written as prose doesn't necessarily make it a better book. Or even you can get to something like Ulysses. I think that you could say two things that are true. Ulysses is one of the worst novels ever written and also a work of genius. It is genius, but it is a terrible novel. Now, the prose in Ulysses, the actual bones of like the mechanics of the writing can sometimes be quite beautiful and quite good. But the structure of Ulysses is intentionally barely coherent. It's only coherent with a key, right? And the key to Ulysses is the Odyssey. That's the whole point of it, And then you get to something like Finnegan's Wake, which is just nonsense, But the point being that you can have something that has incredibly good prose, but fails in every other category: plot, characters, structure. That's Ulysses, fails as a novel in every other way. But hey, the prose is great. Whereas you get something like Orc City, where the prose is clearly terrible, but he understands the structure of the novel in a really good way. Like that people are saying, yeah, no, this is, if you like this type of story, you will like this. It's a way that I think Trad Club gatekeeps, right? Like you get a lot of these beautiful prose writers. Neil Gaiman is an excellent prose writer.
That's true.
I will say this, like I've read a couple of Gaiman books. He is an excellent prose writer. I have serious problems with his works, but the prose is not one of those problems. He is a better prose writer than, for example, Vox Day. Vox Day has very workmanlike prose. It's not bad. Like, I'm not saying he's a bad prose writer. He's not, but it's workmanlike,
Right.
Gaiman is superior in that regard. But I don't think Gaiman's a better writer than Vox Day. In any sense. Like I've read two books by Gaiman. I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I read Stardust. And this is entirely aside from the fact that he's a weird, creepy, terrible man.
Where like I almost made that Norm Macdonald joke. Well, I think his prose is terrible. Oh, I thought it was the rape, but
no, well, yeah. Like, I want to be clear here. I'm talking about him entirely like, Stephen King as well. You could make the same thing, because Stephen King's one of those people that there's going to be a scandal that comes out either after he dies or like right before he dies, and everybody's going to be shocked except like, anyone who's, or everybody's going to pretend to be shocked when it's the least shocking thing in the world. Come on, that dude has skeletons in his closet. It's really, really, really obvious. And I'm not just talking about the cocaine. Right. Everybody already knows about that.
He was a better writer under it. But
yes, he was. But you get my point, right? Yeah. Like, it's not that I think prose is unimportant. So for my own part, like every component of writing is important. I'm just saying, if I'm going to teach someone how to write, I would rather and this is Asimov's point, and you can go in the other direction, right? Asimov's whole thing was like, well, I just want to be clear. The funny thing is that the one example that that people will sometimes point to prove that Asimov could write good prose is from Nightfall, and it wasn't actually written by him. It's the section written by John Campbell. So, that's the stars thing, that whole bit. And it's like, oh, that's good prose, right? Like, that's compelling. Right. Like, yeah, he didn't write that. That was Campbell. Uh,
Once more, my simping for John C. Campbell has been vindicated.
oh yeah, he wrote the best part of Nightfall, which but with that said, like, or you could think of like it also depends on genre too, I suppose.
Yes.
Like if you go into a mystery, for example, I don't read Agatha Christie for the prose. Nobody reads Agatha Christie for the prose. That would be absurd. Um, on the other hand, I would say that like Arthur Conan Doyle, for example, I actually think is an underrated prose writer. I think he's quite a good prose writer. He's great
Mm,
at creating atmosphere. He does it in Hound of the Baskervilles and The Sign of the Four. He has the famous chase on the Thames, and he has the moors and Baskerville. So I don't think Conan Doyle is a bad prose writer, but like Agatha Christie's whole thing, and this is where Asimov excels too, are in puzzles, right? Like she creates
yes.
puzzle mysteries where the appeal of the book is that you're reading along and trying to figure out the mystery, and she will play fair with you. Asimov is kind of doing the same thing in his robot stories and in Caves of Steel. In that sense, it is more important to be clear because you want to present everything in a way that the reader doesn't feel cheated. Like,
Right.
hey, the only reason that I missed this was because it was, it wasn't presented clearly. Well,
Right.
Christie and the Asimov are, if nothing else, very clear writers, even if not very poetic writers. So that's never going to be an issue. Um, all of that said, like, would it be better if they could do what they did and also had good prose? Sure, in the sense that anybody would be better if you said, well, what if they were good at what they did, but also didn't have their weaknesses, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, sure, I guess. With that said, it doesn't take away from the main appeal of reading those books. You read his robot stories for the puzzle, right? What's going on with the robots and how do you solve it, like in Runaround? What's going on? Caves of Steel. You read it for the mystery. What's going on? Who killed this guy, and how do you solve it?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to something like Orc City, I guess I would say too, it's like, why are you reading the book? Are you reading it for this type of a story? And how important is prose when you're writing this type of story? As far as I could tell, Orc City has done fairly well. The way that John Douglas talks about it, he is a marginally successful author, which probably puts him in the top like 5% of all authors in terms of writing.
Mm-hmm.
So that would make him like comparatively an incredibly successful author. In which case, it's like, well, if he's giving the readers what they want to, in what sense is that a failure as well? Now, I'm not talking about manufactured success stories, like things that are bought by the New York Times bestsellers list and then suddenly explode and go really big because celebrities buy them and they're pushed by the media. I'm talking like you give your readers what they want and the readers like it.
That's
In
weird,
which case,
Anthony. Why would you give the readers what they want? That goes against everything I've seen in Hollywood and Dread Pub. And
well, it's kind of funny because Isaac Young reposted something where he goes like, he goes, I say I'm only writing for myself, but I'm really writing for everyone. He says, this is true of all writers. And I respond to him, no, that isn't true. I have never once pretended I was writing for myself. And that sounds like I'm memeing, but I'm actually not even really making a joke. Like in the sense of, to me, it would be utterly worthless if I was only writing for myself. I might as well keep a journal at that point. Like, what if I'm
like be
writing
one
for,
of those janitors who dies and then they discover the dude was a total schizophrenic writing 10,000 page stories about weird stuff.
yeah, or you get a Sylvia Plath type, right? So, but you get my point, right? Like, I understand Isaac's point where he's like, yeah, you don't want to write for other people. It's like, no, I think we could be honest about this. Like, I do actually want to write for other people.
Mm, not
That was,
elitist enough, Anthony. What show do you think you're on?
yeah. Well, you get it.
Yes, I
It's one
do.
of those things where it's like, no, this isn't just for me. I'm not doing it for myself. If I were, I wouldn't want to write at all if I thought that there was going to be no one who would read it. And for the record, it's also one of the reasons where like with fan fiction, I've never had any desire to write it, even if I've had ideas in the past, because it's like I can't make any money off of this, and the audience, I'm not going to build. I don't know. I don't care. right? Like it
Yeah.
feels like a waste of my time. Like I could either write this or write original work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like so I'm not
It's
going to bother with it.
I
But
always view
yeah,
it as if you're gonna write fan fiction, view it as practice. You're using characters, and if you do the fan fiction right, you'll respect the characters, you'll respect everyone involved. But
that's true. I
people
mean,
aren't
I've
really
read
writing. Yeah.
when I always like to tell people one of the earliest pieces of quote unquote published writing is a thing on like fan fiction. I finished BioShock Infinite and I hated the ending so much. I wrote an alternate ending. It's awful. Absolute garbage. It got like 2 comments. One of them was someone going like pretty good. And I went, thanks. And someone wrote like, and then like years later, I got like an email going, someone responded to your fanfic. And it was like someone going, dude, this is trash. And I said, yeah, man. I'm like, you're right. It's terrible.
Yep. Sorry.
I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm like, but you know what? It's still better than what we actually got. I hate the ending of Bioshock Infinite.
Yeah.
Um, so
It's
in a sense, it's a success.
uh,
But whatever.
all right.
I am not. I have not taken it down because I feel like it should stand as a monument to like this is how far I've come.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like for a while, what I would do is I would rewrite the same story over and over again,
That's a
and
great
just
idea, honestly.
and so every year I just see how I did it. So like the first time I wrote it, which again it's doggerel, all right, but the first time I wrote it, it's like okay, it was like 15 paragraphs maybe, something something, pablum drek. Then the next time I wrote it, it was like a full, couple pages, that sort of thing. Then the third time it was actual like 5-10 pages, a proper 3,000-ish word short story. Still, of course, terrible because I was like 18 or so. But uh, still, it was a way to practice and actually check how your prose is developing. I think that I'm going to rant for a little bit while I drive in Pacific Drive. Uh, so I think that there has been a neglect of prose itself. That while something like, oh my goodness, Orc City is, perfectly workmanlike. I'm not going to insult it too much. Uh, more than capable of entertaining its reader for the time it has with the book. I think that there are some things that have been lost, especially within the indie sphere, that was quite frankly something we could take for granted in other eras. And the biggest thing is the fact that most indies simply do not read poetry. I don't even read poetry. I'm trying to read poetry. Another things like that. Like I'm talking about an actual study into how words and um, how the flow of words interacts with each other to create something higher than just uh, you know watching Orc City burn. Which people criticized it. Yeah, sure, most of you guys criticizing it don't even are just memeing, like you're not even like critics. Why in the world should he listen to the random internet drek coming up and laughing? It's a one of those Rick and Morty, I know what I your boos mean nothing, I know what makes you cheer.
Yes.
uh like as perfect as one could ask for. uh but it's uh there's a loss that like if I read something like the Worm Ouroboros, Tolkien of course is the famous one, but like the Nightland, like the original Nightland, um, even things that were like for children like Grandma's Wonderful Chair, which is about good boys and girls going to fairyland and getting candy and chocolate with a magical chair that takes them wherever they want. A witch has stolen the chair, you see. and they have to get it back. Otherwise, they'll never get back in time for home for dinner, and they'll lose their status as good boys and girls. Uh, it's a fun story, but it's also written more beautifully than most of anything written indie, most of anything written trad. Like it's there's and like Enid, I'm talking about, of course, Enid Blyton. There's like Grandma's Wonderful, the wishing chair again, and then I'm pretty sure Frances Brown ripped off Enid Blyton with Grandma's Wonderful Chair. I don't know why I have these. I got them from my mother, but they've stuck around, and I'm going to keep them around forever. Or if you look at something like A Thousand and One Nights, A Thousand and One Nights is tear-jerkingly beautiful prose in many regard. Even when they're describing cuckoldry and the murders, the prose is still miles away from anything written today. Like even when they're describing ugly people, they're ugly slaves who are, of course, cucking them. You must understand, cuckoldry is rife throughout Thousand and One Nights. It's almost like she's telling stories about um, uh, swains getting their just desserts to assuage a man who has been cuckolded. I don't know where people get that idea. The more beautiful than anything written today. It is, it is. Just a second.
Oh no.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I'm just looking for a famous passage. Now, this is from which Sinbad story is this? The third story of Sinbad. Um, uh, let's see here. I'm just looking for a good one. Uh, they basically they're being attacked by dwarves, and the ship gets eaten. 8 men like savages. Um, sure, why not? Scarcely had he anyway, we are lost, he cried as we crowded round him. The treacherous wind has driven us off our course towards that island which you see before you. It is the Isle of Zugb. Uh, there's only one vowel in that, by the way. Where dwell a race of dwarfs more akin to apes than men, from whom no voyager has ever escaped alive. Scarcely had he uttered these words when a multitude of ape-like savages appeared on the beach and began to swim out towards the ship. In a few moments they were upon us, thick as a swarm of locusts, barely 4 spans in height. They were the ugliest of living creatures, with gleaming yellow eyes and bodies thickly covered with black fur, and so numerous were they that we did not dare to provoke them or attempt them to drive them away, lest they should set upon us and kill us to a man by force of numbers. They scrambled up the mast, gnawing the cables with their teeth and biting them to shreds. Then they seized the helm and steered the vessel towards their island. When the ship had run ashore, the dwarfs carried us one by one to the beach, and promptly pushing off again, climbed on board and sailed away. It continues on. Disconsolately, we set out to search for food and water, and by good fortune came upon some fruit trees and a running stream, and so on and so forth. That is a translation, of course, to English from Arabic, but excuse me a second. There is actually, we know the sort of things that the writers of The Thousand and One Nights are reading. One of them, excuse me a second, get the dust off it, is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which I happen to possess. A very fine hardcover. I don't like that one. Here we go. This is his 17th Cohen, I guess. They say the lion and the lizard keep the courts where Jamshid gloried and drank deep, and Bahram the great hunter, the wild ass, stamps o'er his head, and he lies fast asleep. So you could hear, excuse me, the cadence in my voice. There is a natural poetry, excuse me a second, while I ensconce myself back in my computer chair. Uh, I need an easy boy, Anthony, by which I can read all this beautiful poetry. Uh, you must have heard, and I felt it while reading it out, the cadence of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khalif, or whatever his name is.
Yes.
Uh, and that's, of course, translated to English with an eye for the poetry of the piece itself. So what I read from Sinbad the Sailor was a English translation set to prose in a little book that you can take on with you for flights, and it's very tiny, small. Like it's like you've seen how like my hands are pretty big. This is absolutely tiny in my hand. I have to like hold it open with two fingertips. Like that's how tiny it is. Um, these things are like it has less of that poetic power to it, but it still has a depth of field, of cadence, of personality, of not quite the poetry of it, but like the story beats of it. It happens do in ways that I quite frankly don't really find in modern stuff. Certain things like China Millville uh, certainly have some of it in there. The City in the City is what I'm thinking of. But quite frankly, the Pulp Rev guys, they talk about Conan and stuff like that. They're right to do so, and so much as Pulp Rev still exists. But the Howard and Lovecraft and all the famous guys and the infamous guys and the non-famous guys, too, all uh, read poetry, and they read almost as much poetry as they read prose. Most of the prose that was being produced at that time would be what we would call romantasy, except of course it's um, uh, far more, shall we say, polite than uh, the stuff that we are talking about and decry these days. Uh, so it's they came from a spot where they had their Arthur, they had Lord Dunsany and George MacDonald and others, but those guys themselves were deeply fed on the poetry of their era. There's like things like Tennyson's Idylls of a King, the Fairy Queen, even Pilgrim's Progress has a certain poetry to it, but it's not quite the same, as it's a straight allegory. Uh, there was a direct feeding of prose that was of that high masterclass nature that was a universal language across all of these men up until about, let's say, authors arriving past the 1970s, maybe up into the 90s. That's when the decline really happens. The I think that you know that loss of poetic readership has depressed our stock of prose writers, because I will point out that John C. Wright certainly has read tons of poetry. Almost all of his books, at least all the books I can think of that aren't just collections of essays, uh, are frontispiced by a poem. You have, let's see, Nick Cole, I believe, I could say certainly reads poetry or reads the works of beatniks and such, because when he really lets loose, it's more akin to one of their novels than anything else. Um, like there's like workmanlikeness, and then there's that higher nature, that thing that elevates literature. Uh, Robert E. Howard certainly knew of adventurous poems, King Arthur and stuff like that. The Odyssey and Homer, all of them did. I can't say that people know it the same way as they did before. Whatever people view of poetry and its importance to the prose, especially to prose, um, to the stories and the building blocks of a story, now that we no longer have the um, stock that we once did, prose has risen in importance because of its scarcity rather than because of um, its key to writing a good story. Anyone can slam tropes together. It takes something truly great to slam tropes together and sound beautiful at the same time.
Okay, so while I do think that I think most of what you said is correct, right? Like that there's been a loss of beauty in prose because there's been a loss of reading poetry, and you're right. This is a flaw of mine. One thing, and this one is one thing I entirely blame the school system for.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I'm like honestly even more than like reading books because at least with like novels and things you could find things you liked outside of schools, but there's like no modern poetry available, and the way that schools teach poetry just makes it absolutely awful. Like it was probably not till my 20s that I could have like I was willing to say out loud, well actually I like poetry. Right?
Yeah.
And this is an entirely a flaw of like I didn't really understand what poetry was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and yeah, there is poetry that I like, specifically the Iliad and the Odyssey. I finally read after many years. Those are epic poems. I'm trying to read the through the Aeneid. I'm trying to read through a variety of things. I mean, I'm trying to read Dostoevsky right now, as well. Even though I find Dostoevsky to be very, I'm trying to think of the word here. Let's just say that he goes through, it seems like he focuses for a very long time on very small things, and I'll put it that way. Um, like we spend pages and pages and pages at the start of time of Crime Punishment with a rambling conversation with a random dude, and it's like 10, 20 pages of this. But anyway, with that said, I don't think anybody would say that Dostoevsky wasn't an amazing prose writer. You know, clearly he is. So yeah, let me try and think through this properly. I think you're right. There's a loss, and I am one of the people who has experienced this loss. My prose is one of the weaker parts of my own writing. Um, I think that I'm probably, and I say this with yeah, I don't believe in we had this discussion. I don't believe false humility isn't humility, false modesty isn't modesty. So I do think I'm a better prose writer than the Orc City guy. That's not to say I know that I am a better writer, but from what I like overall, but from what I have seen of his prose, I do think I'm a better prose writer than him. With that said, I wouldn't call myself a good or particularly good, I should say, prose writer. That's not my strength. Uh, and that's because I probably don't read enough poetry, right? I like Lepanto by Chesterton. Uh, yeah, but I still haven't read enough. Now, with all of that said, you mentioned like anybody can slam tropes together, but can you do it and make it sound beautiful? Right. Well, they're slamming tropes together, but that's bad, right? Like, and I understand that you're making the
Yes.
point here. Like that I might be being too autistic, but there's a point here, right? Like there is more to writing than the prose. To say like, oh well, you got all of these tropes that everybody wants to see, so now it's good. Well, no, that's what Marvel has been trying to do for years since They're good movies, right? Like, and it's been failing miserably every time. You can't just slam tropes together. You're absolutely right. Like, it's not going to work. Um, but that's the thing. Like, even though it might not be packaged brilliantly, there is still a structure to novels and to stories that needs to be correct, right? Like, we've mentioned Aragon before and Christopher Paolini, and we both agreed that we are both like less harsh on him than some were at the time. Like, I don't blame, like, I don't think, I think Paolini, for one thing, like, that's actually a really good example of what we're talking about, right? Aragon's a great example, in fact.
Yes.
In fact, in some ways, this is a perfect topic for us to be talking about right now. All right, so Aragon was prepackaged fantasy tropes done in a very bog standard way, right? The plot, as many people pointed out, of the original book was actually Star Wars, right? Like, it was literally just Star Wars. People will try and tell you Star Wars was a fantasy. I will argue with this. I don't really agree with it. I also think that the argument is not very relevant. I'm coming around more and more on the genre distinctions don't really matter anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, but nevertheless, the plot of the original Aragon is Star Wars, right? Okay. And what about the prose? Well, infamously or famously, the prose of Aragon is very purple. It's not great. He's clearly imitating what he thinks like a high fantasy book should sound like. He's
Right.
also packaging very bog standard fantasy tropes together. Now, the reason that both of us, I think, are not very harsh on Aragon is that it was the first published work of a teenager. In that
Mm-hmm.
sense, it's actually an extremely impressive piece of work.
Yep.
People will go like, oh, well, his parents were publishers. He was privileged in ways like, sure, yeah, but like, that's not his fault. He took advantage of the resources he had,
He
like I
also
would have done
like,
it too.
yeah, and it's not like he, sort of like just like, oh, I'm going to get published because no, he like actually worked on it. Aragon is a publishable, imminently publishable book,
Yeah.
even if
Yeah.
we're
The
like,
story holds together. Like, it's
yep,
logical. There are consistent characters. He clearly had an overarching narrative that in mind, right? Like, and again, like, oh, it wouldn't have been published if his parents didn't run a publishing house. Well, so what? That's probably true, but who cares?
right.
Like, that's not like what he should apologize because his parents ran he put the
That's
work in, he used the opportunities that he had. Um,
it's woke thinking, that kind of thing. It's like, oh, he had a
exactly.
privilege of some kind. It's like, okay, so I don't care. Like it's, is Aragon worth? Could Aragon be published? Well, quite frankly, they publish so much worse. I'm
Right.
fine with it.
The other thing is like Paolini himself, I've been like following him kind of in the background, not closely, but like looking him up
Mm,
every now and then for years. And he seems like like an eminently intelligent person in that he doesn't play into any of the controversy, which is
yep.
exactly right and exactly what he should be doing, right? Like, he doesn't respond to any of it. He doesn't argue with people about it. He doesn't really do anything but talk about his work.
Yes.
And that is exactly what he should be doing. And in that sense, I kind of like Paolini. Like, it's like with all of this going on around him, dude just keeps churning out books, and he does. Like, he puts the
Yeah.
work in. So all of this is to say, well, then what do we make of Aragon? Is it good or not good? Well, Aragon's not very good. Like, as you
Mm,
said, it definitely could be worse. I'm not saying it's like the worst thing ever written. And for a teenager, it's not bad. In fact, it's highly impressive for a teenager's first work. But judging it like without taking any of that into account, just like on its own, it's not a great book. I enjoyed it at the time. In retrospect, looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, I overrated it. It's really it's really kind of a mess. Now, what's interesting, I think, to discuss here, though, are its sequels, because the original was a bog standard fantasy story. And then he had Eldest and Brissinger, and I never even read Inheritance because those books are incredibly long and I had lost interest. Um, but I did read Eldest and Brissinger. Eldest and Brissinger, I think, are generally regarded by people who are like in the know as worse, right? Who know anything about it. They are worse books. But why? Shouldn't he be getting steadily better? Well, yes and no. I mean, for one thing, it's part of the same series that he
Well,
started when he was a teenager, and it's the
yeah,
same narrative that he clearly had planned in advance, or at least to a certain extent. So there's only so much better you can get, right?
yes,
Um, on the other hand, like it's clear that even though he never said this, he took to heart what people were saying about like you're being too generic. And there are weird things in Eldest and Brissinger that don't
yep,
really fit the fantasy world that he created, right? And
right,
this is what I mean by like there is more to structure than just knowing the tropes and putting them in a story and then saying that's good. That's what the original Aragon kind of did. And then he tries to play with it in Eldest and Brissinger, but he clearly didn't have the experience yet to play with it properly. And it
right,
doesn't really work.
yes. And
So
like, to be clear, I quit halfway through Eldest, and people who have read Eldest may certainly point out the scene, and it is the scene that you're thinking of when those two elves do a weird dragon dance with the tattoos, and the tattoos
oh
come
yeah.
alive.
Yes.
It was very weird, and I couldn't finish it. Not to
It's
say that
weird. And then they like he like
it's
downloads.
incestuous or something.
Well, it's like he downloads his magic powers, and then it's like he's going through this training arc. It's set up to be like very difficult and very long. And like to be fair, he did a fairly decent job of at least explaining, like, yeah, this is going to be really hard. And then he just like gets all his powers. And then it's just like, well, what the hell was that? Now, granted, and in fairness to Kailini, I know you didn't finish the book, but Aragon does lose at the end of the book. So
Yeah,
it's like, and I'm sure like that was part of the point, right? Like he
yeah,
made sure to do that. But nevertheless, it still felt like I was kind of cheated out of the training arc I was supposed to get.
right.
Um, it's
And I
very
think, like, doesn't like Murtaugh beat him up? Somebody told me, or
yeah, Murtagh beats him.
yeah.
And then you
Anyway,
learn that like Murtagh is now enslaved to Galbatorix, who is the evil king because he knows his true name, but he falls in love with the leader of the rebel group in the next book, and that allows his true name to change, and then that's how he escapes. Which is whatever. I don't really like. To be fair, I'm stating plot points out loud, which doesn't really give you impact of like.
yeah.
So, and
It
I
was.
also never finished Brissinger, so I'm not even judging it per se. I'm just telling you what happened.
I will say though, for Paolini, he does have drama chops. At no point did anything, like, when people told me plot points, at no point did I say that's stupid. Like, why would Murtaugh blah 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 blah. It's like, no, they had true names and stuff like that throughout the series.
Yeah,
Uh,
he did set it up. I
yeah,
mean, I will
so
say that.
so it's like, I've seen a lot worse from supposedly better authors, if you get me.
Right,
Um,
exactly. And that's kind of my point too. Like Aragon Eldest Brissinger, I haven't read anything else Kaolini's written. I know he's done more in that universe. I think he wrote a Murtagh book because Murtagh was his most popular character.
oh yeah.
Because, he was like the rebel bad boy version of Aragon who was very self righteous.
If he had been wearing a leather coat, my goodness.
Yes. So he wrote a Murtagh book, which is whatever. Okay, fine. And for all I know, like I know nothing about the Murtagh book. For all I know, the Murtagh book's great. Maybe it is.
Probably
I
is.
hope it is. I wish Christopher Paolini nothing but success, but like I have no desire to reread Aragon though. And I've heard
Yeah.
like Jaji has talked about this too. She says like, yeah, sure, it's just like Star Wars, but my son hadn't seen Star Wars yet, and he wasn't familiar with fantasy tropes, so he thought Aragon was great. And it's like, okay, sure. But then you get the difference between like with Orc City, where he mentions here's a good example. What John Hine mentions in Orc City, he introduces the characters, he spaces them out, gives them a clear thing to want. That's more
Mm-hmm.
than just mashing tropes together, right? That
Yeah.
is a structural writing decision. That's clearly a skill that is learned through time. And I do agree. John C. Wright said this I might not have agreed before I wrote a million words, but now I have written a million words, so I agree. You do need to write a million words roughly or so before you're really good enough, I think, to sell your work, right?
Yeah.
Granted, I might not have admitted this if I hadn't already written the million words, but I have. So, and like there are various aspects of telling a story. Like, okay, I'll actually give you another example. This is going to be a weird one, I know, but it's Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
Harry Potter's prose is decent, but not like incredible. I
Right.
would say it is fairly good though. Like above average, but a step above workmanlike, we'll call it, right? Decent
Yeah.
prose. Rowling, however, this is one thing that Rowling is very, very good at are the larger structural thematic implications of her writing. So this is an example of what I mean. So we're spoiling like a 30-year-old series. So spoiler warning, guys. Anyway, okay, so Harry in the seventh book is a Horcrux, right? And a Horcrux is a sort of phylactery for someone's soul, right? She didn't invent the idea; it's been used a billion times before. But yeah,
Yeah.
well, Harry is
Cliche.
a Horcrux for Voldemort. So in the final book, in order to defeat Voldemort, Harry has to die. And a piece of Voldemort's soul needs to be in Harry, and Harry needs to die and then come back in order for Voldemort to be defeated. Now, there are various ways in which this plot point could have been handled better. Nevertheless, Rowling on a structural level was precisely correct that this had to happen. Like, it had to go that way for the story to work.
Yep.
Because Harry Potter is, by the seventh book, it is clearly a Christian allegory. The Bible is quoted in at least two books. It's quoted directly in the last book. It's also paraphrased in the third book when Sirius says, and you should have, he goes, he was going to kill me, Sirius. What would you have done? And Sirius says, and you should have died rather than betray your friends like we would have done for you. Which is obviously a paraphrase of the Gospels. And then in the final book, they literally directly quote the last enemy to be destroyed is death. So by the final book, Harry Potter is a Christian allegory. Now, there are various ways in which the book doesn't handle this great. It's kind of clumsily done. But on the larger structural level, Rowling understood something about like the myth in Harry Potter that this absolutely had to end that way. And she's right about this. So there are like in Orc City, as an example, there are things in the story where you can have that amateurish prose, but you can understand larger symbolic and thematic elements that elevate the story in ways that lesser writers just won't do. I've seen people I once saw I actually read an essay relatively recently. I'll try and link it to you that tried to argue that one of the last great prose writers was C.S. Lewis, which is really interesting because you normally don't think of C.S. Lewis as like an incredible prose writer, but the argument seemed pretty good. I've never thought of him as a prose stylist. I'll put it that way. I've thought of him. I mean, I think he's a great writer. He's probably my personal favorite author, but I've never thought of him like, oh yeah, I read C.S. Lewis for the prose. I think of like Robert E. Howard for that, or on a lesser level, Tolkien. By the way, it's been very interesting seeing Chris Over reading through The Lord of the Rings and realizing that what everybody says about it is wrong. Tolkien does not waste time on long descriptions. That's a complete lie, and it's just a total, it's the opposite of true. Tolkien is actually, the reason that Tolkien uses his semi-archaic language is because it allows him to communicate more information in less words. He actually doesn't have long descriptions at all. Probably what people are thinking of is that in the Fellowship of the Ring, he spends quite a lot of time on setup and establishing the world and the characters before he gets into the story proper. But once he gets into the story proper, it moves at a very brisk pace. And I also enjoyed his point that he made about the Ents, where he says Tolkien is working with a level of dramatic irony with the Ents that a lot of people don't seem to have noticed, which is that the hobbits complain and Treebeard makes a comment like the Ents don't move hastily, they move very slowly, but within 3 days, the entire species has been mobilized into an extermination war.
Yep.
And
Hmm.
he's absolutely right. It's more that they don't make decision like they don't do things quickly, but when they decide to act, they will act. I don't know. I'm probably not putting that like they haven't moved at all, but now that they have moved, like
Yes.
they're going to move. So yeah, there's various things like that in the Lord of the Rings, but the Lord of the Rings is brilliant prose, but it's not like I would argue it's actually like less poetic than a lot of different authors, like the actual bits of poetry that Tolkien includes here and there aside, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Bits of
because again,
poetry.
Tolkien is trying to communicate large amounts of information with striking words and images, you know.
Yes,
I
it's
mean, if
true.
you think about like when the writers of Rohan are alive, he literally has sentences that are like horns, horns, you know,
Yes.
which get across so much more, right? And, or when Theoden charges, right? Like all of those things. These aren't long, you know, highly descriptive sentences. You don't actually get long descriptions in the Lord of the Rings. You get very few descriptions. Go, oh, Tolkien spends so much time on meals and things. Like, what are you talking about? He absolutely does not. I can't even think of a meal that he spent time on talking about, to be honest with you. Like I'm struggling to think of any meals.
Like
Like,
it's funny because it's like Redwall, like one of the big like quote unquote like climaxes of a story is the characters feasting and the multiple pages of descriptions of feasting and their interactions with each other while feasting. Like it's unironically, um, you know, uh, one of the biggest draws of a Redwall novel is the feast scene that's going to show up very shortly. Um, like Redwall starts with a multiple page feast story before Clooney the Scourge shows up in the chapters in between the multiple chapters of feasts. Like it's yeah, like but the thing is that how it's written is that it's not really criticizable. Like it has a lot of function
oh
within the
yeah, yeah.
story that
It's just so weird to me because I see like there was a meme going around. It's like, ho ho, maybe the Lord of the Rings is one of those recipe blogs where they need to tell a story before getting to the recipe. And I'm read that and I'm like, name one meal in the Lord of the Rings. Like I cannot actually think of a time where we see them sitting down to a meal. I can think of them like, oh, they're eating lembas. Oh, they caught a
yes.
rabbit. Like, no, like I can't think of any recipes in the Lord of the Rings, any descriptions of meals. It's so bizarre to see people just making shit up. Like, like, oh,
It's the
he
internet,
wastes so much
Anthony.
time on food. Name one. Like, there isn't any.
No, there is. In Rivendell.
Is there? Do they actually
Yes.
describe the meal though? I think
Oh,
they
I don't
just
know
go
about
through that
that.
in montage.
Oh, they went through it in montage.
Yeah, they just go like that they had a meal. Like they
I
don't really
guess.
describe
Anthony, it counts. It counts for these random internet people.
it. I don't know. The point being, like, there's so many weird things like this with the Lord of the Rings, and it reminds me too of like we mentioned this the other day, where like people think of the Lord of the Rings like, oh yeah, everything's modeled off the Lord of the Rings, when in reality, the Lord of the Rings was actually a subversion of a lot of common tropes when it was made.
Yes.
Just like Stagecoach became like the model for the Western, when in reality, Stagecoach was already a subversion of Westerns by the time it came out. Like, but it became so famous in its own right. Like, the entire Lord of the Rings, where they go, oh, yeah, it's the quintessential team going on a quest. All right, well, they're broken up by the end of the first volume of the trilogy, right? Like, they're broken up. The leader's dead. You have an elf in it, but the elf barely does anything and is the least important of the trio. Uh, Like literally, one of my favorite and one of the actually good Lord of the Rings memes is when everybody is showing up at the end and he's meeting them. He's like Aragorn, Gandalf, and then Legolas shows up, and then he goes, and then he just says dot dot dot, and Legolas goes Legolas, and then Frodo goes Legolas, you're alive.
It is.
Which is
It
amazing.
is. Hmm.
Because I'm pretty sure they said that, like, I think Frodo might have shared no lines of dialogue with Legolas in the series.
Oh no. Yep.
Um,
No, he didn't. He
yeah,
absolutely did not.
yeah, which is hilarious. But yeah, like the Lord of the Ring, it's so strange, like hearing how people talk about it, like, and how many things are the opposite of true, and that's partially the movies too, which the movies are one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Where I people I know who are like really big fans of the books, like, and I'm talking like, the books are the greatest things ever, tend to hate the movies, and then people are like, oh yeah, I think the books are okay, and the movies are the greatest movies ever made. And when I say that, I don't mean that in like a sarcastic way. I mean they actually think they are the greatest movies ever made. And like, if you're a super fan of the books, you will hate the movies, like hate them. It's a very bizarre phenomenon. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it before. Like, and I don't know what to think about it either. And for my own part, I think the movies are fine. That's
Yeah.
my big review. I think the movies are fine. I think they're so much worse than the books. I think it's like no comparison. Like it's almost insulting to ask. They're so much worse. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's another interesting thing in that Kursova thread where he says like one of the interesting things about like the movies compared to the books is realizing that the same events happen, but the motivations of all of the characters are like entirely different. Yeah, which is true. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, just going back to the thing about pro, like, I guess the point that I'm making here is that there are many elements of writing that you can do well. Like tossing a bunch of tropes into is how you get something like Aragon, right?
Right.
And Aragon's not great. It's not the worst thing. It could have been worse. It's certainly better than some published works. But on the flip side, I can easily imagine Orc City, for example, being better than Aragon. Right? Like, even
Yep.
though the prose is worse, if he has an understanding of how tropes work, because that was really the thing that Aragon lacked the most, right?
Yeah.
Was an understanding of how those tropes were supposed to interact with each other. I do think it would be great if we got to a revival of beautiful prose again, like the one with the rare exception of a John C. Wright. We've just kind of lost that in the modern day, but at the same time, there are other elements, like there are a lot of other elements of writing. If you get like the mythic structure, what needs to be there and what doesn't need to be there, the sense of this could be cut versus this needs to stay, right? All of these things. Or like they were saying, that a character, the amount of time between character introductions and making sure that they have a clear thing that they want, so that there's a driving force to the narrative, right? And then when you get really advanced, knowing exactly when and how to break these rules, right?
Yeah.
Because even then, like if you're breaking the rules, you can do it, but there needs to be a clear reason and you need to know how they work. And it's generally not that you're breaking the rules so much as you're nuancing it, right?
Right.
All of these are things that are beyond the prose. So I do think that the prose is important. And I do think that it would be great if we had a revival of like poetic prose. But at the same time, it's hard for me to be like, because it's one of the things I think that the better prose is among trad club, I think, in a lot of ways. Like, sure,
Yeah.
not entirely. You get Wendig in there, right? Like, who is one of the worst prose writers I've ever seen.
Exactly.
Like, don't get me wrong. I'm thinking more of like, again, Giles Christian, who wrote the Lancelot book that I'm reading. Neil Gaiman, who is a great prose writer. Granted, neither of them are as good as John C. Wright, but John C. Wright got a start in trad pub, and that's, I don't think, entirely a coincidence. So, yeah. I mean, I do think that prose does matter, and I would like to see a revival in it, including from myself. Honestly, I would love to learn how to write poetry, but that would require me to read a lot more poetry and then to write a million words of poems going by my own rules. And I don't know if I want to spend that time on it to become a good poet or if I should just focus on becoming a better prose writer.
Well, it's a mix. It's a balance out. Like you
Certainly.
you don't write the poetry per se. I mean, you could. You probably should for some things, but when it comes to um, uh, what am I trying to say? But like when it comes to like feeding yourself, like I guess one of the other things I commented on about the recent censoriousness of the payment processors, which to men such as ourselves, familiar with Vox Day and other things like that, is in fact a Tuesday. Oh ho hum. Looks
Yes.
like
Fox
the
has been
the
predicting this for years.
yep, Vox Day was right again,
The
suckers.
saddest words of Mouth and Ken are these that Vox was right again.
But uh hmm, yes. Uh the thing that I want to get to is that it's like what I said was everyone wants to have a soul, but nobody wants the responsibility of having a soul. What does that actually mean to have a soul? I was chatting with my music pastor. We're quite frankly, he and I aren't necessarily friends in the same way I'm friends with the main pastor, but we can chat. And I mentioned I had, in fact, this is prescient to what we're talking about, uh, witness to a girl by talking about poetry. And I was, like I had written a funny little haiku about being hot in the summer and farting with your butt cheeks not covered by the blanket. I don't know. It was a little, it's just, like you have to think about it. Uh, it was something like uh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm going into this. The point is that like it was an opening to chat about something much more serious, and that was the nature of her soul. And I was commenting that this person doesn't even really she might say, well, she said, oh, I love God, but it's like I know you're partying and you openly lust after a bunch of people that you really shouldn't be lusting after. Like it's like I don't like seeing this. Please, I'm almost at the point where I'm almost begging for the hijab here. The like put this back in the box. Don't talk to me about this. Um, but it's like first you have to know that you are a person with a soul, right? Then you have to understand that you have, that you can do things and that your things have consequences. Then you have to understand that you have to have, you're going to have evil, that you do evil, and those then that, the next step is, of course, that you'll have consequences for the evil you do. Like, it's a thing, you go on a video, like there was those Cincinnati riots where some white people were beaten by black people. And everyone, like the people who were defending the black people, like, oh, they didn't do anything. Oh, they didn't do nothing, like they deserved it. The whites deserved it. They talked about this. Okay. But so that means that you're stuck on the idea that, things and consequences and whether something can be that you do is evil. Uh, so they're stuck on like stage 3 of somehow like becoming enough of a person and souled to accept, the salvation of Jesus Christ. Like you can't accept the salvation of Jesus Christ if you fundamentally believe you are a hollow husk of a man without consequences to your actions. That your soul, doesn't, like somebody who like, oh, I got a bad consequence, Jesus save me. That's not salvation. That's not anything like it. It's like you have to think about like serial killers who become Christians. Like I've listened to them actually describe their salvation. It sounds real. Like they just like they had to go through stages, and I swear this is connected to literature. They had to go through stages where like they became a person and not just a beast, and then they had to realize they did evil, which you'd think on death row that'd be pretty easy to realize they did evil. Well, no, there's a difference between the law and God's judgment. You know, just being caught doesn't mean anything, except that you were caught. Then you have, you know, that so on and so forth, and then they realized that they were a sinner and that God will judge them for their sin, and then they became, you know, they asked Jesus for salvation and changed their lives. There was a life change involved. But like, you know, like it's a similar sort of thing with literature. If you put these things together, if you don't have, you know, like what's the difference between writing a hardware spec sheet and a piece of literature? Well, it's that the literature stuff is false. No, Sherlock Holmes is surprising, really is realistic. Like Sherlock Holmes is completely realistic. The only thing unrealistic is that Sherlock Holmes isn't in a madhouse. You know, then it's about it has a story. Well, sure, but like, you know, that's like just describing a story within a story. It's a story of itself. You know what I mean? Rick and Morty did an episode on that. It was fairly garbage, uh, though. I I did find retcon very funny. I always remembered that you didn't have bones, and it just falls over without bones. It's dumb. Uh, though the joke at the end where John Campbell is like, as a Force ghost, is screaming and begging the writer to not write what he's talking about is very funny to me. Uh, then you know, okay, well, a story is a thing with characters to it. Okay, fine, but that's, you know, sure, a technical definition, but you wouldn't want to read a story where people just walk in and sit down, right? You want dialogue. You want descriptions of the room they're sitting in. Does the room have, you know, like the next step would be, are there metaphorical meanings in the room and the story and what the characters are doing and talking about? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So if I go if I say something like they walked into the magnolia room, the magnolia room is full of magnolias. Magnolias were their mother's favorite flower. They wanted to talk about their mother. I love my mother. She loved magnolias. Yes, my mother, I love her too. I love magnolias because she also loved magnolias. This is my favorite room. No, you wouldn't read this story. You'd be like, who published this? You know, is this a second grader's work? You know, like it's a good for a start in the sense that, they actually had, like deeper meaning than just a blank room. But it's like, like, no, like the pleasure of the reading, has to have something at least workmanlike about it. The reason why Nick Cole is great isn't because of the ideas he's had. It's just Space Afghanistan. People have done Space Afghanistan, and you don't even remember their names. They clustered their books together in a pack of 10 on Amazon and moved on to other things. No, you remember it because Nick Cole and Jason Ansbach are fantastic prose writers. They write well. They have mostly workmanlike events, and then on occasion they jack up Nick Cole with 50 cc's of amphetamine, and he just goes nuts. And then you get something beautiful, like with Gods and Legionnaires, or when the arms dealer who got marooned on a desert planet discovers the secret Empire base. Well, he was led to discover it, but the secret Empire base that he's going to outfit with his galaxy-wide network of arms dealers, or other things like that. Uh, it's uh, it's a whole thing, right? It's like becoming a person. It's like finding, salvation. Like you can't just start from the idea that this is a string of words strung together about something that didn't happen and then call it a story because things happen in it to people. No, like there has to be a level of beauty to it. So when we discuss reality, oftentimes you might hear the term the good, the beautiful, and the true. You know, you look at a feminist spouting lies, and you know that this person is neither good nor beautiful or true. You know, you read a story, you know, like if you read something like communist propaganda, which I've read a decent amount of propaganda from different places. You know, like a journalist going to Soviet Russia. Oh, these honorable men and their black bread and onions and coffee, black tea in a samovar. Oh, so oriental or something. Like, no, that's ridiculous. This is completely nonsense. You know, this is a fluff piece. You know, but if it's written well, if its prose is worth reading for its own sake, which again, if you can quote it, like, you know, like even in parody, like I did, its prose is better than average. We just talked about Aragon, and we mentioned Murtaugh and Galbatorix, and I described specific scenes in it. I want to be clear, I don't remember most of my coworkers' names at my bouncing job. I spent 16 straight hours with these people over 2 days. I don't remember half of their names. The only reason I remember some of their names is because I actually talk with them more than 5 minutes. These are usually women who I have to like body block when someone gets randy or something like that, you know, or touches their butt. You know, like it's like I have to actively interact with these women, and for a good 3 weeks, I thought one of them was a different one just because she shared features in between her and a third girl who, you know, took me a little bit to remember as well. Like it's like that, right? But at the same time, you know, all of a sudden I can whip out stories that aren't relevant anymore. Aragon isn't relevant. Paolini's only relevant because he wrote some new novels. And because, you know, he doesn't seem to have a sex scandal involving him. Congratulations, by the way. He is above bare minimum for the standards of trad pub. But it's like, you know, like if you can, if it interacts with you and you can remember the events within it and you remember it fondly, uh it's good prose to a point. And I'm not talking about shock literature, I'm not talking about pornography or, you know, base romantasy or anything like that. I'm talking about like actual proper writing. So, like in The Nightland, everyone remembers the second chapter of The Nightland and all the different monsters and people arrayed and the men charging forth, you know, because they heard the call of, or maybe the demon call, perhaps, mimicking Murdath the Beautiful, you know, and the slaying of them and the you know, fighting with night hounds at the protective circle of the last redoubt of mankind. You know, the millions watching in their seats, you know, begging, you know, something be done and a heroic deed, you know, performed. You know, or like in Pilgrim's Progress, where, you know, Christian fights against Abaddon with the whole armor of God, or you know, like, or at the when he comes to the gates of the celestial city, um, you know, like, or something otherwise, like at the end of one of Thune's Visions short stories by Skylar Hernstrom, who is perhaps the best of the prose writers of our time. He, you know, has this amazing scene where Odin, well, who is implied to be Odin, comes forth and takes the spear of victory away from this conquering king just before a fight with these Romans, you know, and like the men are shocked because they all saw this, but they're whipped into a rage and they charge forth. And then, you know, he says something like, "The cool eyes of the Roman general, you know, never wavered," and, you know, he just, you know, the Roman general just slaughters them all, you know, like with his legions. You know, like these things require a certain level of beauty to be remembered because we know that not as beautiful things have existed and are forgotten. Why is Agatha Christie remembered when there were surely a million imitators and a million predecessors. It's not like her stories aren't derivative. They're derivative as all get out. It's that she wrote it well. While people don't necessarily read her for the pose, I have to kind of push back on that because my mother has. She has gorgeous descriptions of Bath, England, and other places in the various parts of the country that she goes to. Sorry, Bath, yes. Same with Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. You can pick out things that she would have seen and written about, that you can do like tours with it, like that can't happen without a better than average prose, more than workmanlike. Um, hmm, it's I guess it's like thinking of like Chuck Wendig. Thank you, Anthony. Anthony, thank you, making me think of Chuck Wendig.
You're welcome.
Uh, yeah, uh, like it's like what is his failing? Is his failing that he doesn't write for didn't past tense baby? Is his failing that he had this or that about Star Wars or whatever? No, his failing was that his prose was absolute garbage. But he got his right spots and he was given his right bona fides because of his politics. But when it came to the good, the beautiful, the true test, he certainly lives a lying life. He's not a good man. I'd love the FBI to check out his hard drive, though perhaps he is not so brave and, in fact, so milquetoast that they would find nothing but plebeian dribble, perhaps cuckold porn. I think that is the sort of man he is. But and when he whatever he does isn't beautiful. Like the good books pass the good, the beautiful, and the true test. World War Z has quite a bit of it, even though it's not quite as beautiful as you might like. But just remembering things like the attack on the zombies in the Paris catacombs, like I had to put the book down. It was terrifying. Like where they're killing zombies, and it's like worse than fighting the Viet Cong in the tunnels. Oof, oof. Like there's ways to elevate a story. World War Z wouldn't be memorable without good prose. Neither would, quite frankly, anything that we've read that we still talk about. Anthony, name a story with bad prose that we talk about.
Describe bad. Like, I would say anything by Asimov. He very famously says, "All I want to do is be clear," which
Yes.
makes it incredibly unmemorable. You mentioned pushing back against Christie. I mean, I can't fault you for like if your mother really likes certain descriptions in Christie, then she really likes certain descriptions in Christie.
That's right.
I suppose what I'm thinking is like when it comes to someone like Christie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I would say if you're reading her, perhaps she's probably like an average prose stylist, but I guess I would say she's not like a brilliant character. You read her for the plots. Like her masterpiece is generally considered "And Then There Were None," which,
Yes.
by the way, I know that has its original title was 10 Little Indians because they were afraid to use the real original title. If you know,
Cowards
you know.
all. Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, the original title was 10 Little Indians, but actually, And Then There Were None is even though they changed it for woke reasons or SJW reasons. And Then There Were None is actually a better title anyway, so I'm going to call it that.
Yeah. That's actually like, even though it's not really something to be brought up that often. Like sometimes, yeah, I'm pretty fine with a change when it's something like that. Does it happen
Um,
often? No. There's like maybe like 10.
Mostly
You know.
because And Then There Were None is actually a better title anyway.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, like and then There Were None is generally considered Christie's masterpiece. But the thing about it is, like, if you ever actually read it, I guess I wouldn't say that the prose is bad or anything, but the characters in it are very lightly sketched. And maybe that's a bigger criticism of Christie, is that she writes archetypes mostly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she's not entirely incapable of depth, but like very much like, and then there were none is really, this is going to sound weird to say for how bloody it is, but it's bloodless, right? Like,
Right.
not literally, obviously, but you are reading it for the intellectual puzzle of what is going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yes.
sure, there is a very tragic ending where, you know, again, spoilers for like what, a 50-year-old, 60-year-old novel, probably older.
70, dude.
Yeah, like 70-year-old novel. Spoilers for a 70-year-old novel, but the last person who dies kills herself, right?
Mm.
And sure, like there's definitely character work going on there, but it's also like Christie wanted it to end with a character killing herself, so she made sure to create a character who had exactly that type of personality, right? Yeah, that's the best I could describe it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
so much that she doesn't feel real, like this sort of person couldn't exist. It's that her character is not the point, right? The point is the puzzle, and then you learn the solution at the end.
Yes.
And I'm not criticizing the book. I think it is a great book for what it is. It is deservedly Christie's masterpiece, you know. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but nevertheless, it's like her strength is in her plotting. Is she a bad prose writer? I mean, I guess I wouldn't say that. Is she?
Mm.
Is her but her weakness is definitely in characters. I've even seen people say like, I had a book written by mystery writers on how to write mysteries that I had read religiously years ago, and one of the chapters was all about like how the writer this person admired the most was Josephine Tay, because she thought her characters were the most vivid from the golden age of mystery writers. I thought it was a weird chapter because it was about like she literally rejects Christie and Sayers to focus on Tay. And I'm like, that's great, but this is a how to write mysteries book, and Christie and Sayers are both way more popular. Like, to be like, you don't want to write like them. You want to write like Tay. Well, no, actually, I would prefer to have the success of Agatha Christie. Uh, Believe it or not, even if
Right.
you personally prefer Josephine Tay. But yeah, you mentioned like, is there anyone bad? I mean, I guess the answer would be Asimov, right?
Yeah. And
And
even then, it's like, is he really bad? Like, I'm remembering some scenes that were pretty good, but at the same time, were they like beautiful? Worth reading for their own sake? No. Like they were just good, well written stuff
yeah, I will
that
say
worked
one thing.
together.
I think sometimes he doesn't get enough credit for his characters. Like, I think, for example, Liar, which is my favorite robot story, I
Hmm.
actually think is a great character study uh, of Susan Calvin. And the way that it ends, I think, is extremely dramatic. You know, she drives the robot insane because she's upset that it humiliated her. Like, is Calvin a complicated character? Well, no, she isn't. But so what? That doesn't mean anything. Like, it's still good character writing. Even the bit that people often meme and make fun of, the Jezebel monologue in Caves of Steel, right? Like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, right?
Oh,
People
I do.
meme this, but I actually, like, when I read the book for the first time, not knowing about the memes, I actually liked the scene. Now,
Mm.
it's nonsense biblically, right? Like, you know, it's a
Yeah.
Reddit tier atheist argument, but when you read the book, it is clear that he's not just using this moment to make a Reddit tier argument. Like, there's a point to the scene. Uh, his wife gets extremely uncomfortable with it as what's his, I can't remember the name of the main character now.
It
Crap,
doesn't
detective
matter.
guy.
Yeah.
Uh, Elijah Bailey, that's it. Elijah. Like, his wife gets very uncomfortable as he goes on this like rant about Jezebel. It gives us a clear insight into how Elijah thinks, and also the differences between him and his wife and how they don't understand each other. Like, it is a pretty good character scene. It's memed for being a Reddit tier atheist argument, and correct, it is, right?
Yes.
Like, 100%. It's a nonsense argument. You know, like it's just it's wish fulfillment. But as a character moment for Elijah in the book, like Asimov was clearly doing stuff there, right? Like it's not nothing. I wouldn't call Asimov's prose ugly, but it is pure workmanlike, as workmanlike as it could be. Again, I guess this goes down to actually, you want to know something? I can't believe it's taken me this long to bring it up because it's a book that I own and it's an essay with the same title. Style is the Rocket. This is by Tom Simon.
For those who play bingo, that's probably a bingo for someone out there.
Yes. I can't believe it's taken me this long to bring it up because it's exactly on topic and it kind of makes my point. Style is the Rocket, which, first off, brilliant book, brilliant essay. You absolutely should purchase it, or at the very least, if you're...
You there, Anthony?
Sorry, my finger hit the mute thing. Anyway, yeah, if you're poor like me, at least go on to Bondwine and read the essay, which is Tom Simon's website, bondwine.com. But Style is the Rocket. And in that book, he makes a lot of the points that we're talking about, as he explains what style is, and he's not talking about specifically only prose style. I suppose there are other aspects, but I guess style is primarily contained in the prose. So it's very directly about what we're talking about. He makes the point that style is under and overvalued by many people. Like the big he uses Asimov as an example of somebody who undervalues style.
Yeah.
Right. So his point when he says that style is the rocket is that it is not the thing that you've come to the book for, but it gets it off the ground. You need style for the book to work, but at the same time, it itself is not the reason for the book, right? And I guess that's my point. Orc City is a great example of style being the rocket. Orc City might and supposedly does, based on what people have said. I haven't read it myself. But from what people have said and what that guy said, Orc City does have a lot going for it if you can get there, right? But the rocket is failing in carrying it, right? He needs to fix the rocket. And at the same time, you get someone where style is the rocket. On the flip side, you get a James Joyce who puts everything on style, and he's crafted an elaborate rocket, but with nothing in the payload. Like it doesn't carry anything. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a very elaborate rocket. So I think actually this kind of resolves everything that we're talking about, right? Of how important is style? What even is it? Is it the most or least important? Tom Simon has answered this question. It is both. You need style to get off the ground, right? Yep. You need style in order for people to take your work seriously. Not necessarily. With that said, it is not itself the work. It is only the delivery method for the work. Isaac Asimov can tell puzzle stories where the main draw is the puzzle and mysteries. Agatha Christie is also excellent at this. But when you get somebody where their style is better, like Conan Doyle, for example. Here's another thing where like you talk about common misconceptions. Sherlock Holmes stories are definitely detective stories, but very, very few of them are mysteries. And there is a distinction. Like it is about a detective, and it's about a detective who solves mysteries, but it is not a mystery that can be or is designed to be solved by the reader. Like literally most of the stories, you can't solve it, nor are you supposed to, nor is that the draw of the story. Like you do not pick up and read a Sherlock Holmes story and go, yeah, like when you're reading a Hercule Poirot, right? You don't pick it up and read it and go, I want to see if I can figure this out before Sherlock Holmes can. You can't. You can't because Conan Doyle doesn't care if you can or not. He doesn't play fair with you, and it's not expected to play fair with you. The Hound of the Baskervilles is unsolvable, right? Like literally it's unsolvable because the critical piece of information is given when Holmes shows up. It's when he looks at the picture of Stapleton and covers up the beard and says, oh, he's the ancestor of the Baskervilles, right?
Right.
You just don't have this piece of information until Holmes gets it. And it doesn't matter because you're not reading the book for that reason. It's an adventure story, right?
Yes.
And that's true of most Sherlock Holmes stories. There's a great and underrated and not talked about enough Sherlock Holmes story called The Engineer's Thumb, right? Which is really like an adventure story. It's about an engineer comes across a strange place, and they hire him for this job, and then they try to kill him, and he escapes, and he loses his thumb in the process. So they need to go and figure it out. And it has one great Sherlock Holmes deduction in it. One of the famous ones, probably the most famous of all the Sherlock Holmes deductions is the dog in the nighttime, which is from the Silver Blaze and is an all-time classic deduction. I draw your attention to the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. And they go, well, the dog did nothing in the nighttime. Well, that was the curious incident, right? He has a similar thing here where they take out a map. The guy had been blindfolded and brought out to the country, and they don't know where he was taken. So then they go, well, and Holmes says, I have a challenge for all of you. He goes, and there's 4 detectives, the guy and 3, Watson and 2 detectives. So he goes, where do you think he was taken? And then he goes, I think he was taken north because there's a lot of country estates that way. He goes, well, I think he was taken south because they heard about mud and there's a lot of muddy paths. And he goes, well, I think he was taken west because, I don't know. Right. And Watson goes, that's funny because I think he was taken east. So we've split the map. And then he goes, Holmes, you're the tiebreaker. And Holmes grabs the map and he goes, he went here. And he circles the point on the map that it started at. And then they go, what? And then he goes, come on, you didn't figure it out? And they all look at him he goes, clearly they blindfolded him, took him out, then brought him back to where they started. And then it's that's how do you think he ended up back where he was when it was all over? That's the only thing that makes sense. And then everybody's just standing there looking silly while Holmes is duh. Mm-hmm. It's a great deduction, but it's also you're there to see what Sherlock Holmes will do. The reader is not meant to solve this, right? That's not the point of the story. It's an adventure story, and it's meant to show off Sherlock Holmes. Sure, there needs to be a certain amount of fairness in that Sherlock Holmes deductions need to make sense. This is something that modern Sherlock Holmes adaptations get very, very, very wrong. When you actually read Sherlock Holmes, this is another thing we talk about, the adaptation versus the original, how they're so different. Sherlock Holmes is he is a genius. He is a super genius, but he is not an impossible super genius, right? He is a very possible super genius. And if you don't believe it, Holmes himself admits this. When you meet him in A Study in Scarlet, he is explaining that his methods are absolutely learnable. You can learn to do what Sherlock Holmes did. It's not something, if you ever watched the BBC Sherlock, that version of Sherlock would never say something like that.
Oh, he's an arrogant prick.
Right. He would never say, he would go, no, only I could do this. Maybe Moriarty, maybe people on my level of intellect could do what I do, but you can't, right? Whereas Sherlock Holmes, the original, he's yeah, absolutely. My methods are learnable. He's talking to Watson about, there's this kid in France, and he goes, he actually is as good at deduction as I am. The only thing he lacks is my encyclopedic knowledge of crime, but he'll get there. This is Watson's introduction to Holmes. So so from the very beginning, Conan Doyle had that in mind, that what Holmes was doing was not impossible. It was learnable. Other people could do what he did. Holmes just did it first. This is why Sherlock Holmes famously anticipated a lot of modern forensics. For example, one of the main, most memorable things about A Study in Scarlet is Holmes criticizing the police for disturbing the crime scene. Conan Doyle predicted this, right? This became standard forensic procedure, and Conan Doyle predicted it because, again, what Sherlock Holmes was doing was, in fact, learnable. That was the entire idea. And that's why Holmes's deductions that's the whole point of the famous Absurdly Simple monologue from The Adventure of the Dancing Men. He looks at Watson. This is a famous one, too. At the beginning of The Adventure of the Dancing Men says, you're looking to invest stocks in Africa. And Watson looks at him and goes, that is insane. How could you have possibly done that? And Holmes goes, I'm going to explain this. and you're going goes and I goes, I'm going to get really annoyed because once it's over, you're going to say how absurdly simple. And Watson goes, no, why would I? Don't be ridiculous. He goes, okay. He goes, fine. He goes, but don't say I didn't warn you. He goes, all right. He goes, you went to the club today. He goes, you had to get out your checkbook to go to, when you went to the club to gamble with your friend. He goes, you came back and you haven't put your checkbook away. He goes, you haven't. He goes, he goes, but you've been looking at the drawer and you've been looking back, but you haven't gotten up to put it away. Therefore, you met, and they go, I happen to know that your friend has stocks in Africa. He asked you to invest and you haven't put the checkbook away because you're still considering it. And Watson goes, how absurdly simple. And then he realizes what he said, and Holmes Holmes gets pissy. It's a great scene, but that's kind of the whole point, right? Like, what Sherlock Holmes is doing is not magic. It's not impossible, super genius stuff. It is deduction. It is something that, like, yeah, he's the best at it because he made a science of it, right? It's what he does, but you can learn it.
Yep.
Like, you can get as good at it. And indeed, in the stories, Watson does admit that he gets better as it goes along. Like he mentions later in the books, he explains seductions that Holmes makes without asking him, because he's like, yeah, I've been around Holmes enough to know that this is how he does it. Yeah. All of this is to say, like, different stories have different appeals. When you go style as the Rocket, you need a certain style for a certain type of story. Fantasy stories generally are expected to have better prose than, like, even science fiction, and definitely mysteries. They're expected to have better prose. They're expected to have a certain type of prose. This is why, again, Aragon famously has somewhat purple prose, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's not unpleasant purple prose. Like, quite frankly, it worked for me. As much as I, may have issues with certain parts of it that come later on. The fundamental thing is that I enjoyed it. It just got too weird. I don't much like that kind of thing that was going on in there with the elves. Don't like them elves, Anthony. I don't. But no, I'm actually perfectly fine with elves. But it's like looking at other things though. Like, people are like, one of the things that I brought up just before stream is some people talk about like isekais, like Mushoku Tensei. If there was a way to say things have workmanlike prose even after translation, it's things like Shield Hero and other isekais.
Yes.
Workmanlike to the bitter end. Nothing beautiful. Nothing worth remembering. I more remember things like Outrage. Like, what do you mean he's buying a raccoon child? Like this little girl thing. This is anime pablum. Disgusting. But if there's one that, excuse me, I hate above all, it's Mushoku Tensei, which is about this NEET who gets reincarnated into a kid, and like basically remembers his life and blah 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 blah. It's lame.
It's so overrated.
It insists upon itself.
It insists upon itself.
It insists upon itself, which is actually like used well in context.
That whole scene is great. It's actually really funny.
It is.
And I hate Family Guy, but that scene is extremely funny.
You know what's weird? I'm rewatching Family Guy in reverse. Like from the latest seasons backwards. And eventually I'm going to come across, and then like I'm like rewatching season 12, like when I eat and stuff like that, and it's actually kind of full of bangers. But the
whole concept of that scene is fantastic. The idea
fantastic
of like, they stop to have a debate on film criticism while they're slowly drowning.
What do you mean, Robert De Niro, Robert Duvall, all fine actors, but it never got through it. I like the Money Pit, and then Seth, like, oh, well, there you go.
The water is rising while they're talking. It's great.
Anyway, but no, Mushoku Tensei doesn't need to exist. It is entirely generic. It is worse than generic. If you it does not pass the isekai test, which is if an isekai is worth any sort of attention, it can live without its isekai. Like if you can cut out like the beginning, right? uh if it doesn't like make sense, like if sorry, I'm mistaken, like an isekai, like
I get what you're saying. Like there are
mm,
three good modern isekai. Let's all be honest. There's Saga of Tanya the Evil, Konosuba, and Log Horizon.
yeah, yes, exactly, modern specifically.
Yeah,
12
there's also like
Kingdoms,
Escaflowne if you go to
Escaflowne,
the
yeah.
older era, but yeah,
Those are previous to this.
yes,
This they're pre-modern. uh all three of them have things that carry on beyond an opening. Log Horizon famously does not have any sort of connection to their real world except in flashbacks. So there's no like opening while they're sitting around inside their own thing like Overlord does or whatever. Like it's just not there. Overlord, quite frankly, does not pass the isekai test. Tanya the
yeah.
Evil, the main,
Overlord's very disappointing.
yep, he's just overpowered. It's stupid. I guess it's a power fantasy, but like he's got too much character. Anyway, then you look at Tanya the Evil. The main thing of Tanya the Evil is some dude got pushed by some guy he fired into the train tracks, and God's like, "Oh, look at this, another dude going to hell." Not that he says it like that, but like basically that's what he says. And the dude's like, "Screw you, God. You never did anything. Blah blah blah." And God's like, "You know what? Let's take this to the test. Like when will I'll make you believe in me. Sort of thing." Uh, and it's interesting because like multiple times Tanya and God, quote unquote, have debates and talk to each other, and God interferes with Tanya's life, and Tanya makes choices, against God and blah blah blah. Like it has a plot centered through it. As weird as it is to say, something like Soul Arts, no, Sword Arts Online is itself a isekai that passes, because the real world affects it all the time, even
Yeah,
though you probably wish it didn't with some of the stuff that's happening.
Sao
Uh,
Abridged is amazing, and I still like rewatch it. It's fantastic.
but like what was the other Log Horizon? Oh yeah, and Konosuba. Konosuba shows up, and because it's a parody of everything, it's parodying it the right way. The dude dies of embarrassment because he uh, didn't even need to save the girl. All these things happen. The focus is on the comedy, not on the isekai. But if they focused on the isekai, it'd actually be total hot garbage. Things like Musako Tensei, some things like Slime and the Spider one are a little bit better, but it's like, they're still power fantasies. Quite frankly, the idea that some of these people can function at all after being neats in their previous life is absolutely monstrously frustrating in multiple ways. Like the idea that the NEET in Musoko Tensei can develop social skills, like nonsensical stuff. Like, what do you mean? Like, what's the point of him having his previous life, and then he develops social skills like any normal kid, and has like all these different characters around him, and of course the hot chicks, the prerequisite somewhat underage hot chicks. It's like what are you supposed to do with this stuff? Like, what do you mean? He doesn't actually grow. He's just maturing like any normal child would. So in other words, what, like being a NEET is worse than a baby? Apparently. Like they're like, I learned social skills the hard way. My family is fairly antisocial. Me being able to talk to people, to joke with them, like it takes an effort. I'm inside my head. I'm thinking about things. Thinking about stories. I'm thinking about shit posting on Twitter mostly. Um, I'm thinking about how psychopathic it is that I'm going through Family Guy backwards. I don't know why I'm doing it. I'm just doing it. Uh, the, I got to check my house to see if I'm skinning any cats or something like that. In a blank out fugue
Mm.
state. Like it's like, but then it's like when I interact, like when I was talking to that one girl about poetry, right? Like that, like she's the type of girl who will chat with anybody, even if she clearly doesn't like them, which I find funny because I won't stop awkward social interactions at my bouncing job. I'll just let them happen because it's like he didn't touch you. Yeah, but he was talking about this, and you could have walked away at any time. Okay. The but like instead, of like, looking away, unhappy that I'm talking to her, she was interested in what I was talking about. Like, and I spoke not like in a arrogant way. I spoke in what I hope was a way that was even a little charismatic. She was interested in the conversation as I was schizophrenically blathering on about poetry and heaven and Robert Burns. The which is of course the average interaction with me, as Anthony can say.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, it's like, like, but like if you look at how some of these guys interact, and especially how low class Asians interact, there's no way in hell they'd even pretend to talk to a girl. There's recently been some shit posting about, like these silicone life mate things. Well, guess what? All the videos of those silicone women android things are of Asian women. They're not of white women. They're certainly not black women. They're all Asian women and video game characters. I'm gonna think that not a lot of white guys are the market. Should we like drop these in India, from Zardoz, like that one Rick and Morty parodying Zardoz, and just let the Indian men stop their raping, like because they have the silicone Asian women. Is that a proper thing? Like it's ridiculous. These things that people bring up. Oh, we're shipping them to the U.S. of A. They're not being shipped to white men, my friends. They're being shipped to Asians. And we know that because of what they're making. Like, yeah, yeah, sure, Asian women being shipped over. You mean we're marrying them? Because the gamma and omega Asian men, which are way more prevalent than they are in white civilization, uh, show up. And looks like we got some comments. But it's like, you know, I'm getting off topic a little bit, but there's like a spirit to things. Excuse me. I've read about 5 books of Mishima, and I'm about to, once I finish The Crimes of Galahad, I'm going to read Confessions of a Mask by Mishima. I'm looking forward to it. It's his first like novel. Uh, 5.5. I've read most of Sun and Steel. Um, he has beautiful prose. He shows a clear and deep life that was, like he committed suicide after taking over a police station and demanding the return of the emperor to power, which might happen if this right wing party continues. Um, he was so real for that. But it's like, he was apparently, the center of several social groups. He interacted with people. He even had like set rules for how he socially interacted with people. If you showed up late to dinner, even 5 minutes, he was like, dude, sorry, you missed it. I'm gonna write. You can eat dinner. Like, I'm not gonna stop you, but I've got writing to do. Like someone like that with a personality. His wife was also quite beautiful, at least by Asian standards. Uh, it doesn't come from like, some sort of weak, pathetic, non-charismatic, uh, uh, whatever you want to call it, right? It comes from a baseline confidence of somebody confident in their art and their work, and it also comes out in their work as beautiful prose. There are scenes in Sailor Who Fell from Grace in the Sea, Spring Snow, um, Temple of the Golden Pavilion, and even the fourth book. which is his last book, and kind of, well, this is annoying because it's like meta narratively brilliant, but it's the dullest of the book, but it's also the decay of the angel. But it's also about like the decay of the angel. Like it's about the decay of a man's soul as things happen. It's frustrating because it's like it's what I want out of trad pub, out of indie pub, even like it's there's something lost without a higher institution creating like artists worth reading. Like I understand the arguments about patrons and neo patronage. Don't quote me, Brian Niemeyer, on this. I was there when the books were written. But the and I promote it quite a bit myself. We have a subscribe star.
Do 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 do.
We blah blah blah. But like there's something lost without the higher institutions. And I know that the ones that we have are just dead. They're political graft machines. They're, all these different things that are true, bad, and they need to burn. But it's like without even one, like, it's like, okay, so, but what are we supposed to do with it? Quite frankly, John C. Wright, after he lost a lot of his contracts with Tor, only really had a lot of good stuff, like truly great stuff, with Castalia House. Iron Chamber of Memory aside, like all his fans talk about the Swan Knight Sun series and how they want that third series. I can't wait for him to be done with
StarQuest.
StarQuest. Thank you. And I've spent money on StarQuest. I've spent money I didn't have on StarQuest way back when. It's like, so it's like, it's not like I'm not putting out my money here to support them. I want to be very clear on that. But it's like, the reason why TradPub exists and should exist is because it gives authors a way to promote their work and to spend time on it. When Scalzi got his $1 million payday and then immediately got writer's block, it was a problem. Like when every time an agent steals millions from her, in this case, because I'm thinking of the guy who wrote Fight Club and American Psycho. Like guess what? It just drags it down. It's that low rent, low trust society behavior that you can't have in a society and also have high trust. Um, like without it destroys a certain element of the setup, right? We don't have magazines, right? Before we had TradPub, we had magazines and a whole bunch of others. Playboy published Bradbury and had like beautiful illustrations about it. Like if I wasn't as I am, I'd probably go out because I know where some very old Playboys are and pick them up and just like see if there's any sci-fi gems in them. Like it was prevalent. Penthouse had them. A whole bunch of other places had them where you wouldn't expect. Like Playboy had a certain culturalism to it that wasn't Marxist in nature, right? When you have a porn mag that is publishing Ray Bradbury, that's not like just a porn mag. It has something more to it. The spirit changes. The pornography remains. But it's like, why did they publish Bradbury? They didn't have to. Pornography sells. Was it there just to disguise it? Was there something more? Were they trying something else? Were they trying for something that was a proper, shall we say, Playboy experience? Like with Man's World, what it's doing with, its publishing things. It's, I'm ranting here, but it's like if an author doesn't have the freedom to pursue prose, quite frankly, I don't think most of them will. Nick Cole can pursue it, but really most of Galaxy's Edge is workmanlike until, like I said earlier, he goes crazy. It's just, I need to get my hands on some authors. I've got a big collection of Longfellow I need to read through. I've been looking through different like source material for Western civilization, fairy tales and poetry and other things like that. I've got Spencer's Fairy Queen on an audiobook, spent an Audible credit on that. You know, maybe that will be different because I'm not like reading it with my eyes, but it's about like filling in my life with, and I hope other people are inspired for this as well, filling in my life with something beyond just the humdrum of it. Like there's no point in slamming in a bunch of prose if nothing's going to work on it, if nothing's going to be higher, have a higher nature to it. Like it's anybody can read pornography. Pornography is as baseline flat nature, even hell natured as you can imagine. And quite frankly, there have been better writers writing some pornography than there have been writing proper novels or even Christian lit. The problem is that like the spirit of the thing is so foul, it can't be it can't really be associated with by good men and good morals. But somebody published it. Somebody publishes everything. Somebody can pursue it. Uh, it's like reading something from pre Gutenberg press, right? Um, if you read something from pre Gutenberg press, it like it half sometimes they just read like a mix of shit posts. Like Chaucer would have been a fantastic shit poster. Let's be real. Then you have something like Post It, where like you have things like Pilgrim's Progress and whatnot, where I'm not sure. Like even though Pilgrim's Progress, I believe, is somewhat divinely inspired, like it doesn't have the same like care put into it as say Dante's Inferno. Like the work of a lifetime seems to be less deliberate, even though it's more spread out. Not that I'm saying that fundamentally, like it's not worth reading or anything like that, but it's like the if you have to copy something out by hand, you're gonna spend some time on it if you get me. So like there's this flowing like river, this dragon of progress and culture. And it's like I'm not even gonna say, oh yeah, the times before were better. It's like no, quite frankly, most of the stuff pre-printing press is fairly boring, unless it's like lives of Greeks and Romans or history books, Arthurian legends, that sort of thing. It's you know the the cultural values change as well, and maybe that affects it too. But it's like if you go down to the writing and look at it, is it good? Is it beautiful? Is it true? Like I think that'll serve you better, especially with this prose thing, that we did tonight. Uh, Prose being prose and all that jazz. It's like I do view it as something that elevate that you have to have at a at a better at a workmanlike level or better for a good story. However, what can happen is that as prose increases in quality and beauty, it can become more and more and more and more, and it can raise up the story to something bigger and better than it is. Iron Chamber of Memory is a good example of it. Excellent prose, character work, all these other things, the descriptions I can conjure up into my head like images, like the ideas of the devil man, whatever he prints, biting his own tongue, the gin shaking in rage, the hand being cut off and the ring regenerating the body from the wrist, like all these different things from that final scene or from the scenes in the beginning in the night sky island and infiltrating the castle, scenes where he wakes up, realizes that things aren't exactly what they seem, and that he's been fighting a battle, a war, without even realizing it. That these things, that he's a penniless college student, but he has a boat. But then he realizes that his memory is editing itself out, justifying it, and like how it's described, how it flows, one to another, almost poetic, and then I read something, modern from, somebody's suggestion. Eh. I'm listening to Pilgrim, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good Audible thing, and it's about these knights and whatnot there. Um, traveling through gin haunted territory, but it doesn't start that way. It's a mix of the grime of the Crusades with its glory and spiritual nature. It's interesting. It's interesting. But I've said all I've wanted to say about this prose stuff, Anthony. It's uh excuse me. It's a lot more nuanced than perhaps good or bad, but I think without it, we would be more like the paupers we are,
I getcha.
Yep. You have anything to bring up? You good?
No, I'm good for now. I said my
All
piece.
right. Yep. All right. Thank you guys for listening in. We do appreciate you.